So hi everyone, and welcome to the GEO Plenary Anchor Session 1 today, Tuesday the 23rd of November. So great to have you all engaged and online. We have a fantastic session coming up. I'm actually really excited about this, and just what the discussion is as we really look at the whole integration agenda for the GEO work program activities, and just given the sort of the way in which GEO members are having to look at really complex policy challenges and the role that Earth observation data can play in addressing those challenges, I think you'll find this very stimulating. So my name's Sean DeClean. I'm on the executive committee of the World Economic Forum, where I oversee several programs, the Tech for SDGs work, the Finance for SDGs work, the Food Systems work, and amongst others. And so I will be both speaking today, but also moderating this this great panel that I'll introduce as we come on. So the run of show is I will provide some brief opening comments, and then I will actually hand over to the much more substantial meat of the program, the real experts in this, and who will actually talk us through some of the key areas, and then engage in a panel discussion and involving also yourselves as the audience. So if we just take a step back and just think about where we are at the moment. I mean, this has been a fairly pivotal year and a half, nearly 2 years for the world, where we must really get back on track and heal from the ongoing crisis in a way that is safer and also more sustainable. But also what's been very clearly demonstrated, smarter in terms of how we use and manage our assets and our resources in a way that can be fairer and more sustainable for the planet. And I can't think of an area which has probably been brought to the fore more during this crisis than the role of data. And so the role of big Earth data, Earth observation data, is going to be absolutely critical in that. In saying that, I mean, there is a real urgency around the need for action. I think, if anything, this is what this year has shown us, is just how important it is to catalyze and build integrated global platforms that can really address some of the complex issues that we're facing today. And to do that with a sense of urgency and scale that is so badly needed. So in many ways, I mean, the blueprint for this exists. It can be found in the Paris Accord, and for those of you who, like myself, had the opportunity to be a COP, I think we see still the challenge that's before us, but also the energy that was coming out of that, in terms of we really have to move beyond the what of what this is to how are we going to address some of these systemic issues. And then if you take the broader context around the Sustainable Development Goals, that's even more the case. And particularly if we're going to address those holistically. And I suppose that would be my first observation for you to just think about today, is that there are critical structural risks that need to be addressed systemically. And it's going to require an integrated multi-stakeholder response in order to transform systems for the better. And that we really need to be moving away from thinking about individual focus areas of action to really starting to look at systems and how we address and change systems. And increasingly, I think experts are seeing that these risks, these structural risks that we're facing, and the solutions that are going to be required to address those, will require us to connect with one another in a much more integrated way. And we're seeing, the potential for major geopolitical flashpoint issues like voluntary mass migration or conflict being born out of issues like climate change and the impact that that's having on directly on local communities, but then how climate change itself is being driven by issues to do with biodiversity loss, the way we manage food systems, the way we look at water shed management, and so that we have to address this in its entirety. We can't just look at a single lens and take that single lens approach. And so as we face this interconnected nature of these risks and this growing sense of the complexity of that challenge of how we're going to deal with it in an integrated way, I think what that's showing is, okay, how do we break those silos? How do you as the big data Earth observation community really start to look beyond just looking at the role of data as a critical issue, but as a systems unlock in its own right, and to play a critical integrated role in other areas? And so if we take the food system, for example, then we, rather than just looking at how do we feed 10 billion people by 2050 and taking that narrow view, we actually have to look at it, as the food system as a whole, and rather than as the separate pieces of the puzzle. As I said, how do we break that silo thinking? How do we value overall outcomes rather than just specific solutions or specific ways of addressing this? And so how do we then work together to address that in a way? And what is the role of the GEO community, for example, in addressing that systemic challenge? Food, for example, you can look at it as just providing more food, or you can look at it as 30% of greenhouse gases is now seen to be as a result of land use and food systems activity, or that up to 2/3 of fresh water use on the planet is used in agriculture, or more than half of the land available for production is being used in food systems, and 1/3 of that land is significantly degraded, or up to 2/3 of biodiversity loss is actually attributed to food systems. And so if you look at that in terms of, okay, how does data play a bridging role to look at that holistically? The second observation I would make is that is going to require a fundamentally different way in which we look at multi-stakeholder partnerships and platform building. That we're going to have an unprecedented degree of cooperation if we're going to manage the complexity of that challenge. And so, given in this case the food and land use, if I use that example to play it out, cuts across health, cuts across environment, cuts across economies, then actually adopting a piecemeal approach to partnerships won't work. And so how do we build out a platform response? How does Earth observation data both act as a catalyst and a driver for that much more integrated platform agenda? And in a way that also ensures that we have efficient and trusted and human-centric data in a way to be able to have the answers to the solutions that we need, where data can help us develop much more agile and appropriate wraparound support services, say in the case of food systems, from farmers right through the whole system involving hundreds of millions of farmers, but also billions of daily consumers who are who are buying and consuming food. And so to help make more informed decisions that allow for much more equitable food systems that are sustainable right throughout that whole ecosystem of plates. And so that means a much more proactive view in terms of looking at the way in which we look at data, rather than just saying we have the data, here it is, use it in a smart way. It requires a much more proactive engagement around the use of that integrated data. And one example that we're seeing of that is around the development of, say, for example, One Map, which GEO has been quite involved with, which is an alliance of dedicated to bring governments and international institutions in the private sector together in a combined way to more easily provide multiple layers of data that may have been traditionally privately held or held for government, that allow much more open data architecture in a way that it builds new systems logic, but also builds trust in that systemic approach. And where you might have an innermost layer, where you've got a data agency and a lot of consent management tools, and then maybe a second layer where you're leveraging technology innovation to develop insights while maintaining, say, the right of that privacy, and then a third layer around shared standards and architecture to ensure that data can be shared more easily using aspects like confidential compute in a way that allows the shadowing of data rather than necessarily the integration of data, and then building a fourth layer right through to so that you're actually creating a whole range of digital and pharma electronic wallet services and active digital marketplace solutions that allow for the use of that data to really change the whole system. And that's going to require then, if you're taking that much more holistic approach, a much more active, engaged way of looking at how we place data. And I think that would be then my third sort of and final observation, just for us to think about today, is how do then, when we rethink innovation and design thinking as a critical lever, if we're going to successfully transform some of these complex systems agendas like food systems, or looking at the whole spectrum of climate change, including mitigation but also adaptation, for example. So how do we design for scale? What is in a way, the innovation process doesn't stop until your Earth observation service is in the hands of that target market. And so how do you actively engage right through that to cut through and develop those enabling tools that act as a bridge across silos, while also providing the depth and the linkages between the macro and the micro in a way that that really benefits the ultimate end users, which maybe, say in the case of food systems, maybe those hundreds of millions of smallholder farmers who depend on that knowledge to make informed decisions that are so critical when they're being challenged across multiple fronts, like with weather changes and breakdown in supply chains and things like that. So this is going to require a much more innovative way of working, and for us to think about how we design to build that innovation in right from the start, to include multi-stakeholder partnerships much more dynamically, and to also make these human-centered from the outset in the design process, bringing youth to the fore, gender in, bringing like smallholder farmer communities in at the design process in an innovative way. How do we design fit-for-purpose ecosystems that allow for that data to be really used at a country level, where how that may be applied in somewhere in Africa may be very different to how that's applied in India or in Europe or in Latin America. And so how do how do we build those purpose-built, place-specific innovation ecosystems and design for that? How do we design for interoperability, to create this vibrant, user-centric open data system that allows data to flow seamlessly between users, and the ability to leverage insights across those different data sets through different siloed ways of working to break those silos? How do we design for value sharing in a way that that actually the value isn't just being captured by a few that have control over that data space, but is actually being shared equitably across the whole system to build trust in the role of data in terms of opening up society to actually use data to look at things like ESG, environmental and social governance issues, and make sure that we've got the sort of quality of data to really open up our capacity to use ESG in the pricing of things, in the retail pricing, say the cost of food, where it's been estimated that actually the retail cost of food, the real cost of food on the planet, maybe 3 times the actual price that's at the supermarket. Or design financial models in a way that data unlocks and de-risks technology and allows financial services and financial economies to open up and to build these new economies that are going to be so critical in a post-COVID world. And so what is the role of designing data for those financial models that de-risk, that allow credit risk assessment, say example, of smallholder farmers, for example. So I'll leave it there. I just want you to think about those 3 aspects as we listen today. How do we think about things in a much more systems-orientated way? How do we really rethink the nature of the way in which we engage through platforms, and how do we break open the whole way in which we think about innovation and the role that data plays, and we design systems to really be able to create that systems unlock. And so I will stop there. You've heard enough from me. But I hope that's just stimulated you as we now sort of listen to some of the people who are really addressing this in very dynamic ways. And I move to the panel itself. And so to kick us off, Ian Jarvis who's the director of GEO Global Agricultural Monitoring, GeoGLAM, the flagship initiative at GEO, who's been stationed with the GEO Secretariat in Geneva since, I think it's 2017, if I'm right, Ian, but who was also previously, working on agroclimate, geomatics and earth observation, agriculture and agri-food, in Canada. And so, Ian, over to you in terms of just giving us an example, a sort of practical example of this integrated opportunity that we have in this complex environment that we're facing.
Okay, thank you, Sean. That was truly stimulating and inspirational, actually. You've asked the question, how? And I think that's where we hope to get to some extent today by providing some examples. And I'm going to look at it from the GEO work program, a bit from the GeoGLAM perspective, but more generic as well. Thinking, as a work program participant within GEO, how we really address this challenge. And as Sean pointed out, the societal environmental challenges before us are many, they're complex, they're interlinked. As a community, the challenge is to break silos and come up with integrated solutions. That's really the challenge and the charge we have. Now, intuitively, we know that GEO can play a significant role and help address our wicked problems. And GEO has evolved with many very useful initiatives already contributing to solutions. However, most of the work program activities to date are work independently from each other. Now, this could be a challenge, but really, I think this is a great opportunity because there's a great potential here by increasing the integration between our activities to really unleash the power of GEO by enhancing this work across the work program, and of course, bringing in the partners outside of GEO that we work with as well. Next slide, please. I like this slide because it just shows the interrelated complexity, and this is just sustainable development goals. This is just a very small piece of it. It's from a website, European Observatory of Earth Observation Networks. It's based on some work that in part came out of Connecting GEO and H2020 initiative. Advance one, please. So just looking at it from one indicator in terms of one initiative, GeoGLAM, and one area that we can contribute, we identify some variables, and we can see how they're linked. But we know as a community within GeoGlam that these variables can support many, many other sustainable development goals. The challenge for us is how do we communicate that? How do we work with others to see that happen? So it's clear that we really need a new paradigm within GEO and beyond that allows us to work and share in a more integrated fashion. So the ultimate question for today is how can we as a very diverse community achieve this level of integration? Next slide, please. Of course, everybody knows the saying, the whole is greater than the sum of the parts, and this is certainly true within GeoGlam. It's made GeoGlam what it is by bringing in many diverse contributors and trying to bring more value as a team. Now, this is true, as even more true perhaps within the entire work program. We have the same potential to bring the parts together in a greater way across the work plan. And I said we intuitively know that this to be so how do we achieve that? Well, today in our presentations, Estefania next will provide a case study from her experience in South America that demonstrates the need and suggests the power of integration to address complex interrelated problems. Angelica will talk about some of the work within GeoGlows and GeoGlam that are doing that and can contribute. And those are just two GEO initiatives. And if you can just imagine if we could roll in other things like land degradation, neutrality, the GFOI, and so on and so on and so on, you start to see the power of what we can achieve. And then finally, Jim Verdon is going to talk about the work of FuseNet and what they're doing for food insecurity and how they integrate science-based information across various communities to achieve their objectives. Next slide, please. And this is this last slide I want to leave you with. I took this from Anthony Lehman, and I'll put in a plug for an essential variable side meeting at 6 p.m. European time today, looking at this very question: how do we integrate from the work plan perspective using essential variables? And I'll leave it at that, and I'll turn it over to the next speaker. And thank you very much, Sean, and the organizers for the opportunity.
Brilliant. No, thanks, Ian. And just one question just for you before we jump over. But I mean, you've been, as we sort of move over to Estefania, who'll be talking about particularly the Paraguay case. I mean, you were involved in a 4-month sprint with the whole idea of one map. I mean, do you see that if we use that sprint modality we can really start to get quite specific about how we can address some of these complex problems by bringing everyone together in a fairly focused way?
I think that's a great approach. GeoGlam already works with several international organizations, including FAO and World Food Program and so on, and by extension, World Bank. These relationships have been critical to building consensus around information and delivering on our mission. The sprint is now allowing us to engage the private sector more, something that we haven't done. And I firmly believe that the best solution to many of our greatest challenges will be public-private sector solutions. And we're just seeing this start. And I think it's something that the entire GEO community could learn from and perhaps build on.
Yeah, no, I felt similarly in sort of being engaged with it, particularly the opportunity, and as you said, the opportunity to also use some of the design modalities that the private sector can bring to that combined approach. So Estefania Puricelli, from sort of agricultural monitoring in the Americas. I mean, the example you're going to do in a way builds on that, looking at the whole water, energy, food nexus complexity, but really zeroing in on a country-specific example in Paraguay. So maybe over to you just to give us that country-specific lens and bring this down to local reality.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you for having me here. I'm going to talk about the particular example, and the idea is to show the need of integration to tackle complex problems, especially the SDG. The Paraguay-Parana Basin and the highway are extremely important hubs for the region, not only because of the biodiversity they host, but also because of all the livelihood they provide for the population in the major cities and on their shores. Next, please. So the there are some issues in this region that we could see that they're overlapping of different like silos, right? So we have not only the agricultural production, but also the transportation and also the impact in the markets. And around all this, we have also the policies, right? That and this showed the need for creating and creating data sets and provide good information for policymakers so they can make like informed decisions. Next, please. So the Parana Basin is in Central South America and covers portion of northern Argentina, southern Brazil, southern Bolivia, and the entire extent of Paraguay. The two major rivers in the basins are the Paraguay River and the Parana River. The region is currently undergoing a major drought that started in 2019, and it may continue into 2022. The current drought is clearly demonstrating the vulnerabilities of the system as a whole. Next, please. Through the highway and its infrastructure, the international commercialization of the production of grains and agro-industrial derivatives of Argentina, Paraguay, Bolivia, and part of the production of the Brazilian state of Mato Grosso is transported. This extended region has a planted area of more than 35 million hectares with a soybean production of more than 100 million tons, equivalent to almost the total production of the US, which is the second soybean producing of the world. Next, please. So we can see that this key hub for food security, while Argentina is the number one exporter of soybean meal and oil and number third exporter of maize and soybean. And Paraguay exports of soybeans are increasing, and there are approximately 2 million tons a year. The peak of harvest for soybean is between April, May, and June, and the peak of harvest for maize is between March, April, and May. Here we can see one crop mask where I just used the example for the soybean production, and we can see how extended that area is. And something important to mention is that these countries really depend on the agricultural production. For example, for Argentina, almost 55% of the whole exports are from the agricultural sector, agro-industrial. And from Paraguay, for example, 10% of their GDP is from the agricultural sector. So this is a really important economic sector in this region. And the use of this, the Paraná-Paraguay highway is really important because that's the way the markets connect with the producers and the farmers in that region. Next, please. So what happened during COVID, where we saw a very a choke point, right, in this whole system? The policies related to the COVID restriction were in place. They started to be in place around March, April last year, and that's when the peak of the harvest starts. So all that grains and oil and all the production needs to be started to get out from that hub, from the Rosario area. There are many ports, and also from Paraguay and the upriver that like all the production is getting out. So the policies in place were like related to restrictions for mobility, and even though there were a lot of caveats to agricultural production, there was still a lot of like uncertainties of what was going to happen. So between all these COVID restrictions and the harvest situation and where we saw like the peak of when the system is at its peak, the river was at the lower level. So that meant delays, and that meant lower transportation and higher costs of transportation too. That adding to a tight supply market situation globally, and all the markets were expectant of the agricultural supply chain resilience because it was like a lot of uncertainty, and everybody was looking at the harvest in that area, in the particular area, since Argentina and Paraguay and Brazil are really important soybean producers and exporters. The markets were relying on that production at that time of the year. Next, please. So how they accommodate here, there's a picture of the river at the time. So you can see that the level was really, really low. The system was able to accommodate the many organizations had to shift from going to doing in-person paperwork. They had to shift to going virtual, and they were there had to be a lot of coordination between national, provincial, and country level to enable the transit. Combined with this low level of the river was a moment of tension in the system, if you want. And something that is also important to note is that most of the production of Paraguay goes through that channel, goes through that river, and also most of it is milled in Argentina. So we need the river to transport the production of Paraguay to Argentinian milling facilities to then produce like soybean meal and soybean oil. And so again, these countries rely on this production at this time of the year. Next, please. Next, if you click again. Yes, there. Thank you. So, well, in this particular moment, the export, the loaded vessels and crushing flow decrease to a very low level, and the vessels can carry less when the river is lower, so they carry approximately 7,500 tons less. So that directly impacts the cost of transportation, and that also increased the cost for imports. And like in the market, we have to take into account that it's not only the impact that it has to the exporter country, but also the price that the product reach to the importer countries. There are many countries that rely on that product. They don't produce them, so they rely on the market to get the product to then use it as an input for feed or for consumption. So this was like a choke point for international supply. And well, as I mentioned before, like Argentina and Paraguay, they represent the 15% of the soybean global production. So markets were looking at this place in the world at that time. Next, please. Here we can see that after, like in that moment, like also the whole market for grains and oilseeds were a little bit tighter, and like started after the pandemic, like because of many different issues and variables, the prices start like increasingly higher. Not because of this situation in particular, but in general, the system was already like tight. Next, please. So we have like different initiatives in the region related to agriculture in particular, and then, well, my colleagues are going to show other initiatives that are they have different scope. Next, please. One more. Well, okay, no, it's okay. In 2011, as part of the G20 Action Plan on Food Price Volatility and Agriculture, GEO was launched together with AMIS. And AMIS monitors international price volatility, while GEO monitors conditions in the G20 country, crop conditions. The GEO provides timely, relevant and information on global and regional and also national crop production. So that's why we were also monitoring the situation really, really closely, because it's part of our mandate, and it's something really important to get together the specialists around the world who knows how the conditions of their different crops are. And that relationship with AMIS also provide us the insight with the markets of like how the market situation is, and like this combination of information created more transparency in the market and provide help to try to avoid the big price spikes, especially when like there's no information of what is going on, and providing information in general gets makes that the prices are not like as volatile. Next, please. So GeoLam developed the crop monitor as I show you, and in that report we include every month in the market Amy's market monitor, and we have several other initiatives after the success of Amy's market monitor. In the crop monitor section, we started like the early warning crop monitor that is more focused on food insecure countries, and also we have different regional initiatives and also national. So the idea is to try to cover the whole world and have an idea of what is the situation every month for all the different crops. We are currently working on the global crop monitor, and the idea is to include all those countries that are not in the Amy's G20 initiative, or they are not food insecure, but there are a lot of different countries that are in between, especially in South America. So we are working on that now. Next, please. We also have the AMA, the Agricultural Monitoring in the Americas, and the idea of this project is to have a closer integration with the Americas and try to find if they have challenges with the use of remote sensing technology for agriculture, and we work very, very closely with the different partners to try to achieve a better and more transparent crop estimates and crop conditions reporting. Next, please. So the idea is that it's a community of practice, and we want the relationship between the partners is really important, and the monitoring of the situation because the Americas are very diverse, so not all the regions are the same. We cannot treat them the same. The biodiversity they have is very different. The climate, all the different variables are really different. So it's important to be able to understand all these differences and embrace them, because in this combination is where the group can better succeed. Next, please. We also created a resource hub to integrate different information that the partners might have, and that was really good to engage them in different conversations and in different projects. Next, please. So the final comments, there's a need for increasing integration. The problems that we're facing are very complex and they are very diverse. And it's not only, in our case, it's not just agriculture, it's market, it's policy, it's water, it's like weather, many, many different things. And we need to provide data and also can help policymakers, different actors to make informed decisions. And there's an interlinkage between initiatives with common topics. And agriculture, for example, relies on water, not only for production, but as we can see, as for transportation. And we need to focus on SDGs. From the agricultural point of view, zero hunger is a main goal, but keeping an eye always on the sustainable practices. And the policymakers' support for this type of initiatives is key for our success. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Estefania. No, really interesting. I think, I mean, what I took away from that as well is also that it's not just about providing data, hoping that the different parts will actually use that data and then make the bridges, that you actually have to, you have to manage that relationship across these different players. And so I actually see the GEO community as a bridge builder in that sense to really provide an integrated approach. And so it's very powerful, but it does require, going beyond the traditional role of just providing data. Yeah. So Angelica Gutierrez, I mean, in a way, as the lead scientist at NOAA, but you're presenting on how these integrated solutions come together through the different GEO activities and can increase the capacity to handle some of these multiple complexities that Estefania was pointing out there. So maybe over to you for a sort of dynamic way of how we look at that.
Thank you, Sean, and good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all. I'm here on behalf of the thematic activities within the GEO Work Program and communities who leverages the initiatives development and knowledge for decision making. I will have my colleague Sophia later on in presenting. So multidisciplinary approaches are required to address the complex environmental problems of our time. And since the establishment of the Group of Earth Observation in 2005 by the Third Earth Observation Summit in Brussels, GEO has prompted collaborations and activities in support of GEO engagement priorities represented by the United Nations 2030 Agenda, the Paris Agreement, and the Sendai Framework. The pledge for a decade of action and delivery for sustainable development was, however, slowed down by the immediate need for a transformative recovery post-COVID. We are now looking more closely at the connections among the Sustainable Development Goals, climate adaptation, and disaster risk reduction targets. By leveraging advances in Earth observations, cloud computer services, and open tools, as well as guided by the implementation of interoperability architecture, we can now start the conversation to identify challenges, opportunities, and areas needing additional research and technology to achieve this holistic knowledge. This is to take advantage of the synergistic relations, limit possible trade-offs, and accelerate transformational change. The demonstration you will see today of horizontal integration seeks to paint a vision for GEO to go beyond producing and mobilizing data or individual services into one that accelerates transformations into multidisciplinary knowledge base products and services. This demonstration has been developed by staff from AmeriGeo community and a subset of thematic leaders from flagships and initiatives within the GEO Work Program. This holistic approach stresses linkages that at the moment are difficult to see and understand. Next, to paint the vision of data integration, I will be using Teria, an open source tool that provides the ability to transform data into knowledge. Teria allows us to bring multiple data sets together for spatial temporal analysis and forecasting. Like Teria, there are other tools that can be used to achieve this data integration. I want to take this opportunity to highlight the importance of historical data for evidence-based decisions and the need for continuous monitoring to understand the past so that we can better forecast the future. For this demonstration, I will focus on the Parana River Basin in South America, one of the most alarming recent cases of climate change, going from a mighty river to a muddy trickle. And here is where our story begins. The Parana and associated aquifers provide water for 40 million people in Brazil, Paraguay, Bolivia, and Argentina. Population in this watershed is mainly concentrated in urban centers like Sao Paulo, Buenos Aires, Rosario, Asunción, and Brasilia. And for comparison purposes, the Parana River is about half the length of the Mississippi River in the United States, but has a similar discharge of about 17,000 cubic meters per second. And let's keep this number in mind because I will use it in my next comparison. Many studies in the region indicate that since the 1970s up to about 2018, the discharge of the Parana increased at a rate of about 1% per year. However, in 2019 and 2021, the discharge rate was reduced to 17,000 cubic meters per second, or about 1/3 of the 17,000 number that I mentioned before. Next. In terms of biodiversity and ecosystem, the Parana Basin has one of the largest wetlands in the world. Pantanal has been referred to as the world's largest continuous wetland, roughly 10 times the size of the remaining Florida Everglades. It has an enormous biological wealth and works as a regulator of the hydrological system of the basin. Unfortunately, there is increasing evidence that this large and rich ecosystem is threatened by a number of activities, including mining, illegal hunting, agricultural development, and deforestation. Next. Let's look at the changes in land use and the effect of these changes in the region. In 1970, the distribution between agriculture and forest was of 17% and 83% respectively. In 2008, the distribution was almost the opposite, with 75% agricultural land and 25% forest. In this example, near the city of Rosario, Argentina, we see a significant change between 1992 and 2021, with a significant increase in forest cover and an enormous change of agricultural land in urban areas. A study by researchers at NASA looked at factors that could explain the increase in discharge in the Parana River from the 1970s to the 2010s. Their conclusion was that while land use effect dominantly altered the long-term temporal dynamics of the river, the change in the seasonality, meaning when the largest flood will come or the drought will come, discharge, can be attributed to the combined effect of land use and climate variability. Let's go back to the river and let's talk about energy production. The Brazilian part of the Parana Basin has the largest hydrometrical power potential of the country, with more than 150 hydroelectric power dams that transform the Parana River and its tributaries in a succession of lakes. The upper Parana River Basin, down to the Itaipu Dam, constitute more than 50% electricity capacity currently in operation in Brazil. Itaipu is the power plant with the greatest installed capacity, supplying 15% of Brazil's total energy consumption. Because of this control infrastructure along the rivers, then floods along the Parana River are not a main concern within Brazil, but floods generated in the upper part of the basin impacts Argentinian cities located along the middle and lower part of the Parana Basin. In keeping the river at the center of our story, let's move from energy to food production. The regional agriculture of the Parana Basin is mostly rain-fed, and irrigation is applied to a very limited part of the basin. If you recall, I talked about the consequences of land use and the effect of climate variability in river discharge. Additionally to the issue of land use change, the reduced evapotranspiration associated with land conversion contributes to the reduction of precipitation overall. Since 2019, rainfall in the Parana Basin has dropped sharply and left a swath of land baking in drought. Argentina declared a 6-month drought emergency for the Parana River region in late July of 2021, calling the crisis the worst in 77 years. The Rosario Stock Exchange estimated that due to the 2021 drought, Argentina alone lost $620 million in exports of soybeans, flour, and oil. What we see in the screen is an indicator showing the global drought total economic loss risk decibels. The drought has affected the region since early 2019. Next. For example, low water levels have grounded several ships, and many vessels have had to reduce their cargo in order to navigate the river. The availability of water is becoming less predictable. Increasing incidents of drought and flooding are affecting flood and energy production, water sanitation facilities, and many other activities vital to the well-being of humanity. So the ability to forecast hydrological extremes will reduce uncertainty, increase informed decision-making, and develop data-driven strategies. The GeoGlo's ECMWF streamflow services delivers the reliable river discharge forecast information as a service worldwide, which spares users from the resource-consuming tasks necessary to gather, analyze, and process all the underlying data that must otherwise be integrated and computed locally. The global hydrological model produces a 15-day ensemble streamflow forecast globally and a 40-year historical simulation that can be used to understand long-term trends. We are seeing in the lower part the 40-year historical data for the Rosario site, the city of Rosario in Argentina. So this brings me to the end of my attempt to paint a vision for GEO that goes beyond just producing and mobilizing data or individual services into one that accelerates transformation into multidisciplinary knowledge-based product bases and services. I recognize, however, that this is only one small piece of the puzzle, because integration is not only achieved by the scientific or technical community. It is imperative to bridge the divide with communities from many other sectors to achieve a holistic understanding. I want to thank you and thank my colleagues at the GeoSec and GEO initiatives and flagships who contributed to building this small demonstration of what could be our future. Thank you.
Thank you, Angelica. Really interesting. I mean, particularly as you look at the integration thing. I mean, if I asked you just quickly as a quick follow-on question, I mean, what does this mean then, knowing GEO well for its work program? I mean, what would be the thing that you would say that, say, in the next 12 to 18 months, that GEO really needs to do what you're suggesting, to work across these different spheres of action?
So the conversation has already started. And within the initiatives, the individual initiatives, we all have been talking about, data standards, interoperability, and so forth. So it's a matter of coming together and figuring out, what will be the story. This was a very quick demonstration, and despite of that, we were able to bring data from GeoGlam, from FAO, from GeoGlows. So now it's a matter of establishing what we are going to do together.
Great. No, and I think actually this idea of sort of short sprint modality as well is I think quite interesting in terms of how can you learn fast and adapt quickly to how that can be done. Jim, over to you then, maybe. I mean, Jim Verdun from FuseNet. I mean, I've always been very impressed with the way that actually USAID has been able to break out of silos and think, sort of in a much more integrated way, and very much the case in the last few years. So, listening to this, and as you look at the work that you're doing, how do you see that integrated approach and reinforcing the collaborations across GeoGlam, in a more, and GEO more widely in a more integrated way?
Well, thank you very much for that kind introduction, Sean. And I hope in the few minutes available to me that I can share with you a good look at the way in which our activity, Famine Early Warning Systems Network, has successfully engaged with two important GEO initiatives: global agricultural monitoring, which was quite natural and began quite a few years ago, and GeoGlows more recently, as we see the range of hazards, climatic hazards confronting food security around the world become broader and more troublesome. So next slide, please. So FuseNet, for those of you who don't know what it is is an activity that's supported by funding from the U.S. Agency for International Development, the Bureau for Humanitarian Assistance. And it monitors the most food insecure countries around the world with the purpose of preventing famine and mitigating food insecurity by providing USAID and other decision makers around the world with actionable evidence-based analysis that can be used to program food assistance. In the most recent fiscal year that just closed, BHA programmed about $8 billion in emergency food assistance around the world, $8 billion US dollars, and the decision support of FuseNet was key in guiding that to places and times where the return and impact would be the greatest. Next, please. So how FuseNet approaches this, it's inherently a very multidisciplinary thing to assess and project food insecurity around the world. It's founded upon an understanding of the livelihoods of the people in the countries that are monitored, and then regular monitoring of potential shocks stemming from climate extremes, agroclimatologically, price spikes, pandemics, things of that kind. And that monitoring supports scenario building 3 times a year. An 8-month ahead scenario is constructed using a comparable classification system. That's the internationally accepted integrated phase classification system to represent degrees of food insecurity. And that is communicated then to decision makers so that they can program available funds accordingly, which unfortunately are always less than what's needed to meet the need. Agroclimatology, of course, being the sector where Earth observations have been most prominent and really important since the beginning of this activity in the 1980s. Next, please. Next slide, please. Right, so here are some examples of FuseNet's use of time series Earth observations. On the left, vegetation index imagery illustrating the profound drought conditions in Afghanistan. In the center, land surface temperature anomalies over the Horn of Africa, illustrating drought conditions there. And on the right, satellite rainfall estimates, which blend gauge and satellite observations to estimate precipitation, in this case over Central America, all with deep time series, so that, as Angelica was explaining, we have that historical context and we can identify anomalies and make our ongoing monitoring that much more meaningful. Next, please. So it was natural for FuseNet to engage with GeoGlam. We participate every month in the development of the crop monitor for early warning with the many partners whose logos you see depicted there. It's very important and valuable for us because we reach an international consensus on crop conditions around the world and in the countries most vulnerable, eliminating ambiguity for food security analysts and decision makers. And of course, ambiguity is the enemy of all decision makers. Next, please. In terms of climate extremes and the agroclimatological monitoring that FuseNet does, drought has really been the greatest concern for a long time. The activity was born out of food insecurity emergencies in the 80s that stemmed from drought episodes coupled with conflict. Historically, flooding really wasn't of sufficient magnitude to affect food security at the scale at which FuseNet works, with some notable exceptions: Somalia in 1997, Mozambique in 2000. But climate change has really shown us that this is changing, and the frequency and magnitude of regional scale flooding is growing. The very vast floods last year in East Africa were estimated at a return period of 1 in 50 years. And as a consequence, food security analysts and those programming food aid asked FuseNet to furnish better flood information with food security implications explained. Next slide, please. And so thanks to our engagement with GEO and GeoGlam and our awareness of the breadth of activities under GEO, it was possible for us to turn to the GeoGlow streamflow system to meet in large measure the needs that we have for flood information at two different intervals. We have a monthly review of seasonal climate conditions and looks ahead. And we also have a weekly weather hazards briefing for the food security analysts on every Tuesday of the week. And we find that the forecasts, in particular, the finer scale forecasts, that 2-week range of GeoGlows are especially well suited for those weekly weather hazard briefings that are led for FuseNet by NOAA. Next, please. So food security is inherently a multidisciplinary activity. And so it's natural that we would want to go broadly within GEO to get sources of information and data to help us. We see that a warming climate is increasing the threat of flooding in those areas where we work. And GeoGlows is certainly a welcome resource for integrating flood hazards into the famine early warning analysis process. Next, please. And that is my presentation. I'd be happy to answer any questions. Over.
Jim, if I may just exercise my right here as the moderator, but I mean, really interesting. And I think this idea of like integrating flood hazards into early warning analysis is a really good example of that integrated play. I mean, how much do you think this requires curating that knowledge with sort of key stakeholders with a degree of intent? You know, where it's actually quite intentional how you curate that and maybe how that practically happens, right? Beyond just, I think what is coming out of this panel, it's beyond just providing regular update information, but that idea of actually engaging the stakeholders in sort of joint solution design thinking.
Right. So in our activity, there's really sort of a chain of information and handling. So we have physical scientists that are quite conversant and comfortable with the sort of basic drought and flood information, climate forecast information that's available out there. And we work then with food security analysts who are primarily social scientists who are intermediaries. They've been cross-trained to appreciate and understand what Earth observations have to offer, as well as climate forecasts and things of that kind, such that they can integrate that information into their assessments of food insecurity based upon their social science knowledge of prices, markets, livelihoods. And in that way, they're able to deliver an integrated message that draws across all the disciplines to the decision makers who have responsibility for assigning those scarce resources to the places where they'll make the most difference for us. Since that is the fundamental problem, the needs are much greater than the available resources in the world today. And a donor like USAID, BHA, has the responsibility to see that those scarce resources do not go wasted anywhere, that there are no glaring gaps, that they're applied as usefully as possible. And Earth observations are fundamental to that.
Yeah, no, great. No, thank you. And we're seeing countries actually adopt this. I'm seeing countries like Kenya and Indonesia actually adopt war room type strategies for integrating data during COVID, where they're dealing with locust plagues and flood risk and COVID impacts across health and that. So countries actually taking on what it means to build this sort of ecosystem of data integration. Just looking at the clock, then I think maybe, I mean, Jim was asking if there were any questions. What would be great would be if people would put some questions in the chat there in the side, bring some questions up, and we'll come back to the panel just after we hear from Thierry, just to get some of your input. So I really actively encourage to get your questions up there over the next 5 to 10 minutes, and then we can engage. So just now going over to Thierry Ranchin from eShape, really looking at, to give us an example of this transversal activity and a generic method for co-design of these integrated activities. So sort of builds on what's been said so far. Thank you. Over to you, Thierry.
Thank you, Sean. So thank you very much, Sean. And I'd like to take the opportunity to present some of the activity we are conducting in the framework of EuroGeo. And while we have some great example today, I'd like to show you some ideas, tools, and things that we are testing and that are of interest in the way of integrating implementation of GEO work program activity, and I think it will support our job in the coming months. So next, please. So just to give you a flavor about EuroGeo and eShape. eShape means EuroGeo Showcase Application Powered by Europe. So that's a contribution from EuroGeo to GEO and to all the GEO engagement activity. And of course, we are supporting all the GEO work program activity, as you will see later on. Next, please. So some fast facts for you. What is eShape? It's 7 showcase talking about agriculture, health, renewable energy, ecosystem, water, disaster, climate. We had 27 pilots at the very beginning, and we include 10 more pilots during the 2 first years of the project in order to test our ability to apply the tool that we have designed and prepared to newcomers. And now it's 69 partners, and we have 2 more years in front of us, a bit less now, to demonstrate our potential and our support to GEO in providing tools for integration. Next, please. So we are implementing EuroGeo solution with eShape. And as you know, the change of paradigm in EuroGeo was to start from the data-driven approach to a user-centric approach. So that's key in all the follow-up of my presentation. And EuroGeo is acting as an incubator in the downstream part of the value chain in order to complement all the Copernicus and all the EO activity in Europe and more in GEO. It brings together a wide range of actors of the EO community, and you will see that on the follow-up. And we are also working in collaboration with regional GEO to adjust a new priority. The first one that will be, which is a new priority, is still in our program, and we are working on that. And also, as we are dealing with operational services at the end of our project, we are fully in line with the Canberra Declaration, and we are supporting also the involvement of the private sector. And also, we try to anticipate the new EO landscape with in-situ gate services, citizen and object-driven observation, and all the connection that we could have with new IT solutions. Next, please. In my view, as a coordinator of this project, this slide is key to understand a lot of the things that we are struggling with in integrating the implementation of all the GEO work program activity. So this is something we call the conveyor belt. You can apply that into any type of project or any type of idea you may have as a researcher or with a decision maker approach. You start from an idea, you try to develop some R&D, some prototype, a business plan, even if it is a public application with a minimum viable product, and then you go to commercialization and expansion. And you have need for access to knowledge, to capital, to technology, and to market. And here you have a series of points: user requirement, policy, priority, etc., funding, finance, tool, export, promotion, etc. And when it's blue, it's the fact that you don't need so much effort on that. And when you go to red, it's the place where you need the most effort. So the idea is, for example, when you start with an idea, you don't need so much input from the users. But at the end of the day, when you want to have a minimum viable product, you need them, because the product should be fitting to their needs and really contribute to what they want to do. Next slide. So here is an example of what we are doing within eShape with some of the activity that are here. Only the one on gray are not part of our project. It's mainly the acceleration modes and the access to data and cloud resources. We try to be agnostic and to be able to use all the data sets, all the assets, and all the type of access that can be done. And the export mission, because it's a bit far from what we are doing. But we contribute in our activity to all the elements that support the knowledge, the access to capital, to technology and market. Next, please. Let's talk about co-design. Sean left us with a series of how-to questions. And in one of them, I strongly remark that we are talking about data-driven approach, but also to the need to comply and to be innovative. And so what we try to introduce in this project is the idea to build a relationship with the series of actors that are here through co-design aspects. So we go to take the support of our colleague from the humanity sciences and to bring them in our context in order to work on the co-design methodology dedicated to the EO context, because it's very challenging. We need a specific method, and we have to address some issue in terms of growing an ecosystem with a long-term perspective and avoiding to have blocking points that are everywhere. It's not only at the end user level, but in different points of the value chain that we are building. So that's some of the elements you see in red on this scheme. Next, please. So we want to grow an ecosystem of efficient EO-based service designer. So next. So it's a two-phase approach. First, we need the diagnosis and then an action phase. First, to know what we need to do. Thank you. And to explain the different blocking points that we have in the ecosystem. So we built a representation of each pilot ecosystem with the value information data framework, identifying the blocking point, and try through the next step, next please, through the action phase to implement co-design action to unlock the blocking point. And in each of the activity we have, the idea was really to build resilient fit with stakeholder. The idea is to build on the long run and try to make it really the roots that allows the activity to grow up. Next, please. When we look to the implementation, that's really the idea of built on the 37 pilot, some elements that allow us to go further in terms of implementation. Donc, it was really cross-fertilizing by sharing knowledge across the different domains, exemplifies the success that we have, increasing awareness about the different solution, using of cloud computing, which is most often not an expertise, work on interoperability, sharing knowledge on data management plan, etc., and really build success story to showcase what we can do. And so the idea is really to build a big picture of the current ecosystem of resource and to have a kind of vision at the end of the day based on standard and interoperability, which is key to reuse and to really work on this implementation of these different activity. So, and then because we are working with a lot of people in this project, that's really the cooperation between the different domains with end user, with market expert, and between application and platform provider. So that's what we did in terms of implementation. Next, please. As you remember, I say we are working on a user-driven approach. So it's key to bring the user on dialogues and to identify their primary use and needs much more than given them something which is working. We need to dialogue with them to build together the solution. And that's really the idea of identifying the community, dialogue with them, build with them solution, and make a series of user uptake events that allow to build capacity and to give them some tools to go beyond only their sectorial level and go to national and international. Next, please. Next slide, please. It was the one before, Florian. Thank you. And then, of course, we need to work on sustainability. So that's really to work on the different access to knowledge, market, and capital, and really to provide tools, trends in terms of market policy, technology, and investment to give guidance on innovation and intellectual property. We do a webinar on the last EuroGeo workshop promoting this aspect and discussing this aspect for the community. To understand also the national Earth observation maturity of each country. And we built some tools for that. And of course, all the elements that we are developing within eShape will be shared with the EO community when it will be at the good level. And of course, understanding and promotion of the social economic value of what we are doing. We have to open the door to wider user community and really help to access to capital in order to have in the funding landscape the support of all the potential actors to build this integration. And of course, what we did, because we have the possibility to do so within this project, it's to onboard new pilots at a different level. We start with some bunch of pilots that were promoting some things with a certain level of development. So in the last bunch of onboarded pilot, one of them was at the level 9, and the idea is really to help him to upscale at a maximum. So you have a lot of elements that are available through the sustainability booster, which is available through the web address which is here. And now, next one. If this appetizer was good for you, you can see more in terms of details on the side event we are organizing on Thursday for 4 to 6, and that will be followed up by the EuroGeo workshop presentation side event. Or you can take a look to what we are doing on our website, Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, and etc., etc. Thank you.
Thanks, Thierry. I don't know about others, but I actually found that framework really useful to look at in terms of also the idea of, right, how do you use co-design both in terms of engagement but also in the build phase to go from design to implementation to sustainability, and just how that you've thought through that. So well done. So okay, so we have a little bit of time. We've got 20-25 minutes just to engage the panel a bit as well. So if you've got questions, please put them into the Q&A section in the chat. I see we've got a couple there, and I mean, I've got one of my own as well, in the sense of asking the panel, of the GEO activities that you see at the moment, what is, given this integration approach and that, what would be, do you think, maybe the potential for the flagship opportunity here to really demonstrate that shift in practice taking place? But so bear that in mind. But just to look at what's in the chat and for the different speakers to come in. So Carolina Adler has asked, from GEO Mountains, has asked, numerous initiatives, prototypes and ideas to encourage greater integration across GEO's work program activities are being presented. Very encouraging. So it goes to maybe that question that I was asking about, which of then those GEO activities could really be given, could stand out at the moment. Anyone feeling brave on the panel?
I could respond. Well, from the GeoGloss perspective, I think that when you look at the SDGs, 17 of the SDGs basically are touched by water, and so I believe that GeoGloss could be one of those foundational activities. But I also recognize that there are many of our GEO initiatives and flagships that have been doing an amazing job in the individual, the thematic activity. So I think that we have is not only one or two. I believe that we do have the richness of information and knowledge that is in GEO is absolutely great. So we could go with any of the activities. The point here is initiate the conversation and to set concrete actions to move forward.
Yeah, and I mean, so and building on what Thierry was just saying there at the end. I mean, for you, Angelica, is there a specific way to go from building that cross sort of framework within the GEO network to that implementation? And to really create that big picture of current ecosystem resources. I mean, what the question that's come through from Caroline Adler is, who and how do we need to enact that?
I can take a shot at that.
Thanks, Ian.
Okay, I see it as really a three-pronged approach we require. We already have the top-down policy mandates and priorities set by the GEO participants. Then we've already seen the work plan activities have been very productive, and they've already been thinking about how we integrate. Then I think there's a piece in the middle of that third prong that is really the public sector finance, like green climate funds, private sector support, and the innovation that the private sector that can bring. And also providing some sustainable business models for some of the activities. What we work on is not as important. I think there's many areas we can work, but the important thing is that we move forward and we do work together. And as Angelica said, we define some concrete actions, because really, I think the science is the easy part. It's the management of the cultures and the human behavior around the science that's the challenge. And unless we start taking positive step forward and do it quickly in a sprint format, perhaps, we're not going to advance the game very much.
Yeah, and I think I mean it's interesting looking at that whole sprint modality as well. How can you really zone in on a particular area and say, right, let's give ourselves 3 to 6 months to really engage with this. And actually with Zoom at the moment, with people still significantly working from home or via via the web, then it allows actually people to have rapid engagement around this and to build that implementation capacity together. There's a question
on this.
Yeah, jump in.
Yeah, sorry, if I can jump in, the sprint approach is something that we are using, in fact, in terms of implementation. I forgot to mention it. And that's really a good way of having some goals which is shortly attainable and that can support also the momentum in terms of collaboration. So that's a great approach. And through an agile approach also, you can also build on this sprint approach in order to really deliver and to put the effort on a short term for pushing this.
I mean, Jim, I don't know if you're aware, but it was interesting actually at COP, the US government launched Aim for Sea in quite a big way together with 30 countries, and which was actually the heart of it, which is agricultural innovation missions for climate. And what I found interesting at the heart of that was to actually encourage a whole series of parallel innovation sprints that could bring people together to really fast track that design process. So it's interesting that, you know, even at a major country level, that sprint modality is being seen as a key thing. Estefania, you've just coming back to you with some of your thoughts, you know, reflecting on how do we translate this into action within the GEO network.
Well, something that we keep seeing in different areas, especially in the Americas, is that the need of empathy, right? You have to sit down and talk to the people in different areas and see what they need and see what their issues are, because it's one thing to learn from the data and make conclusions from our perspective, but it's very different to sit down and talk and see what is the perspective of the user. So I think that it's a challenge. It's not easy. There are like many language barriers and cultural barriers, like Ian was mentioning, but it's not impossible and it's doable. So we need to, you know, join efforts to do that. And in those conversations, you can see the approach that is in all the different initiatives that GEO has, right? So it's not only agriculture by itself, it's also agriculture plus water plus sustainable practices plus SDGs. So it's like a big mix that if you're in your silo, you don't see them, but once you start the conversation, you start seeing them, all the different silos coming together. So I think that that's really important to keep in mind, to be empathic and to listen to the user.
Yeah. Sean, I want to follow up what Stephanie is saying. I think that a big point that I want to make also is that, you know, this integration cannot be only within GEO. We need to reach out to other organizations that are very, very important, you know, and I'm going to mention just a couple that, you know, because I work in my area, but CEOs, for example, is a very important organization because of remote sensing information. The WMO is another organization. So I think that many of our initiatives have been working on that, but it will be, and I know that the Secretariat is also working on that, on reaching out to other. So it's just the integration should not be only within the GEO initiatives. We need to bring those organizations that are also leading similar activities outside of GEO.
Yeah, no, I mean, two really strong points there, actually, two different things. I mean, one, I think that is so true. Looking at it from the World Economic Forum perspective, it's that, right, how do you bring different partners together? If you just operate within your GEO silo, yes, you'll create integration, but actually these you know, these nexus agendas are happening outside as we speak. And so then how does GEO engage? I've seen that firsthand. I chaired the UN Food System Summit Innovation Leader, and it was really exciting watching GEO engage with the World Bank, engage with the FAO sort of data, CGIAR's big data team, all coming together to look at this integrated one map work together with the private sector, with the likes of Google X, and there were specific countries being engaged, and so I think that's happening. There's not that many examples of it. I think from a World Economic Forum perspective, we'd like to see a lot more of that, and they're very happy to help, you know, make sure that can happen, because that's where you know, it's going to be so important. But it does require, what we saw in that example is it did require actually people at different points took leadership. And for the GEO community, it's like, where do you want to be a contributor and where do you want to lead in that integration space? And I think the GEO community has a huge opportunity to actually be a lead partner. I think Estefania made a really powerful point, which is going to be so true on the back of COVID, is I think in a way, data has been fast-tracked to the front of the stage in terms of the impact that it can have. The challenge now is if that is not done in a way that brings people with you on that journey, that's not done in an inclusive way, I think then the data community writ large will miss a huge opportunity to build trust coming out of the back of this COVID thing, where equity and the importance of individual people and trust in data and all of that could end up actually clashing. And so I think we have a huge opportunity to bridge that divide. And I think your point, Estefania, is so true. But we also we could make, we could also fail badly in that if we just focus on the sort of scientific data-driven aspect of this and don't take that human-centered dimension very seriously. Jim or Terry, you've been quiet. I'm just also allowing anyone else to come in from the panel.
Well, I would echo two of the thoughts shared by Angelica and Estefania. First, the thought that we need to work outside of GEO and recognize the convening power of other organizations such as World Meteorological Organization. If we have a potential constituency for an activity in mind, we can identify organizations that already bring them together and work with them in order to get the necessary engagement to open the dialogue. And then once we have that dialogue open, we need to listen, as Estefania explained, to really understand what the information requirement is, what are the decision-making cycles and processes, and from there, then tailor an activity that brings Earth observations to bear in a way that very squarely addresses the information need of the constituency that you've been able to engage with. Over.
Yep. Jana has put a challenge up actually to this group on the panel. Like, if given the support for this sprint modality, is there even engagement within this group to really look at, how we could frame a sprint as a sort of new piece of GEO, the GEO work program, and really use this as a test bed for a sort of wider approach. So that's also a challenge to us on the panel here as well.
So, if I may start with a part of the answer, that's something that I've been experimenting in terms of architecture implementation plan in the past, and that was really fruitful. And I think it's a good idea to come back to such an idea and to build that, but on different topics than only architectures. And I think it's quite a nice and interesting approach to apply such a challenge or a sprint to different type of activity in combining them and trying to integrate it diverse GEO work program activity.
Yeah, and Terry, I mean, you've done it within a European context, and in a way that works well because you've got a lot of really dynamic think tanks and all of that. Is it, how adaptable is that to, say, doing it in East Africa, where you don't have that same, or in Latin America, where you don't necessarily have that same depth of organizations who can come in?
Yeah. We in fact, the different pilots are experiments, and they are built on different activity worldwide. So we have experiment with some countries, or with Israel, with some countries in Africa, even with some difficult problem due to some civil wars. So we have to adapt. It's some of the pilots are applied in Europe, of course, but not only. And the idea is really to upscale at the international level. So what we built on this project was a series of activity, but we put on our duty to extract a strategic finding and to share it with the community. For giving you an example, which is really technical, we had work on the data management plan of our activity, and to cross the different type of knowledge coming from the FAIR approach and from the GEO principle, and to build a tool that allowed to support this type of evaluation. And it was shared with the data working group, and I think they were quite happy to see such an approach. So that's on the tool dedicated. The co-design aspect is really something that can be used in any type of country, and what we built, it's really a methodology and try to give tools for the community to go further, because you talk about co-design in a full set of projects or opening for call for a proposal. You see this co-design, co-creation, and co-evaluation approach. But when you try to have information about what type of tools we have, what type of methods we have, you don't find anything. There is only one publication talking about co-design in Earth observation when we start the project in 2019. It was somebody from Canada, and so with the team we built that, and we tried to propose and to explain that to the different community and partners we have, and really it's something which is really powerful, and that's in my point of view, it's one of the big success of what we are doing. The cloud approach is something which is nowadays commonly understood and explored by many of our community. There is some programs, and the next one coming from Microsoft. So that's really shifting to this cloud approach. That's great, and it's applicable everywhere. And the market, of course, and the sustainability is something that should be adapted to the national and to the international context. But in my point of view, we are working on something which is without frontier in terms of observation. So that's something that could apply anywhere.
Yeah.
I have an example to add to that what Thierry said in Latin America. So with all these initiatives, we are really building bridges and building institutions in a way. And that's really important in the moment of a crisis or during a situation that like policymakers need to act fast and make decisions and make policies. So, for example, for Argentina, we developed a lot of different relationships with different institutions within the government. And that helped us to also connect different ministries and different institutions within the government, connect them together. It was amazing because it was us from outside putting them together and connecting. Oh, these people, they are researching this, and these ones are researching that. Why don't you guys connect? So, and when one of the latest drought happened, like with all the connections that we had and with all the information that we start sharing, like we helped them develop an index to define who gets some policy package after like a big drought in Argentina. So we were able to do that because we built bridges before. So not just when the crisis happened, but all this institutional relationship and building trust between partners is really important when things are critical. So I think that's really important, the building bridges and generating institutions and networks.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think the role for institutional innovation here, and as you said, like getting even government departments to work together to use data as the bridging mechanism is so powerful. There's an interesting question actually in the chat from Rud Grimm. It's to Thierry, but actually I think I can pose this to anyone. I think it's an interesting one in this space around what's the role of entrepreneurship in developing markets, in low income and middle income countries. Particularly from the investor perspective, and because this whole question of the valley of death, there's a lot of money there for grant-based initiatives, but then to actually make this sustainable, to your point, Thierry, how do you build that ecosystem in a way that moves us from being a nice pilot idea, and we've all seen wonderful pilots that have worked, very few that have actually gone to scale. Or that are sustainable over the long term. So how do we bridge that valley of death, so to speak, from a financing perspective?
Yeah, That's not a short and easy answer that I can give, of course, as you know. First of all, a lot of the pilots that we are handling are coming from a legacy from previous projects. So this means they have a long story. To give you a type of idea, in a past work, we work on the energy sector on delivering a solar radiation databases and products, and it takes us from the project to the commercial sector close to 10 years to go there. So it's really a long and difficult road toward sustainability and to entrepreneurship. We try to give some support to this to the developer and to the entrepreneur in order to give them tools to avoid to lose too many times looking to the different aspect of what they need to go further. It's why we built this sustainability booster, which is available on our website and which is open, of course, in order to give them some insights about the market, to give them some support in terms of information, but also to try to link with the good actors and the one that can really support them in terms of financing. So that's the idea of building the bridge towards the sustainability of the activity. I think in Europe we have other type of objects or program that support this kind of things, and I think it's really for the moment the need for public money to support this, and then when the market is not so far, I think we need to have a strong team which is ready to go, and that will be the success behind that. And of course, we have this Valley of the Death, and we try really to work on this upscaling in order to open as a maximum the number of users of the different pilots that have been defined.
So Thierry, I'll just get you, since you're there, and then for the others to queue you up. Just so, what would be your final, like from today's session, your final takeaway? 30 seconds, 1 minute, sort of like, this is what you're taking away from today's session, which I found really dynamic. So, just what's your takeaway?
So I think the title of this session is really interesting, because what we are looking finally is users of what we are doing. And so that's really to balance from the data-driven approach that we had for a long time in GEO to now user-driven approach, and to build on so that this pyramid starting from data, going to information, knowledge, and at the end of the day to wisdom, and in fact to decision making. So we are on this pyramid, climbing the different steps, and we need to support this and to continue on that in order to integrate all the finding and all the activity that we have, building on some of the tools that we are developing, and really try and exemplify what we are doing as a maximum, because the example is something that helps the people to say, I can do it.
Yep. If not now, when is the question? Yeah, no, exactly. Yeah. We've got the tools, so let's really make this happen. Yeah. Who else wants to just give their quick 30-second, 1 minute maximum overview?
I can do that, I guess. Just at the risk of repeating things already said, I think the work program is fine. It's already very productive. There's some very good activities there. But what is required is more of a common vision around integration, but importantly, the funding to drive it, because especially from the research to operations community, this is the lifeblood. So we need to really develop this new paradigm. We need to start with something concrete, as I've said, and doable. Probably pick a region of the world that has these complex issues that we can work together on. And as I said, the science part is relatively easy. It's building the culture of open science and integration around it. But I should also say we haven't said enough about the GEO role, the GEO Secretariat, the program board, and so on in all this. And that, to me, they're really at the center of things. they have the ability to lead, I think, in a lot of this, become the catalyzer, bringing all the pieces together. And I think GEO is uniquely positioned to really drive this forward with all stakeholders in that regard.
Yeah, no, critically important. I mean, I think there's been quite a bit in the chat as well on, people really encouraged by this, and can the GEO Secretariat really encourage this kind of integrated approach in practice, in practical terms? Estefania, I see you nodding there, so I'm going to pick on you as final comments, and then go to Angelica, and then Jim.
Well, something very short, but it's part of what we discussed, that the challenges are transversal, and so we need transversal approaches to get there, and a lot of collaboration and communication. So that's what I think we can round up this session with.
Yep. Absolutely, and I think others are also starting to do this now, and so there's an opportunity to really have GeoCentra in that. And to Angelica's earlier point about engaging other communities and looking beyond just the GEO community in that transversal thinking. But yeah, no, great. Angelica.
Something that I have not mentioned today and that I need to is the role of the regional GEOs. And so, because going back to the point of Estefania of people, I think that the regional GEOs have that, the power to connect with the different organizations and governments. So yes, we, from the perspective of initiative, thematic initiatives, we really need to engage even more to our regional GEOs. We need to strengthen through our scientific capacities. We will strengthen the national GEOs in that sense. So more integration also, not only in the thematic, but also through regional work. So I want to leave it there. And
no, I think it wasn't stated, but it came through powerfully today. I think the role of regional differentiation is so key here, and so the role of regional GEOs is going to be so important, because it's going to be very different, the context in somewhere like the Sahel compared to in the Mekong Valley in Asia, compared to what's going to happen in the Amazon, and so in the Amazonia. So that the role of regional GEOs is so critical. Yes, Jim, you get the last word.
Well, I think I would just underscore the really important necessity of engagement and regular and frequent communication with end users of any initiative that seeks to leverage Earth observations to meet information needs. Clearly, in the world that we live, information needs are going to require integrated responses and solutions, because they're so multidisciplinary in nature. They cut across so many different elements of societal concern. And I think if we have some initial expectations for potential constituencies, then we can engage with them and in an iterative way develop solutions that are tweaked and improved, and ultimately achieve sustainability, because we have a constituency that demands the information on a continuing basis on into the future.
Yeah. No, and the demand is absolutely there, and so it's that ability to then respond to that in a dynamic and integrated way, as you said. Well, I hope everyone. I was absolutely enthralled by that, and just that actually, I think Jana used the word in the chat actually very early on about a trailblazing session. I thought, well, that's a bit bold given we haven't actually started the session right yet, but actually as I've sort of gone through this session, I really feel that in a way, having engaged the GEO community over a number of years, it's there's really something there, and so I hope that as members there's a real desire to take this conversation into action and really implement that. I was fascinated that, like Thierry was saying, that actually, in terms of some of these tools and methodologies for this integrated approach, they hardly existed a couple of years ago. But we do have that methodology now, and so I think, coming off the back of COVID, there is a huge opportunity to really come out quite strong in this integrated approach to using data to unlock some of the most complex challenges we're facing. And I definitely see that in the interface between food, water, land use, energy systems, and if you take the example I was giving earlier, where East Africa last year, I was working with them, and you had the worst locust plague in history, combined with major flash flooding, combined with the impacts of COVID, combined with supply chain breakdown, and they're setting up of a data war room to sort of manage all of that. So thank you very much. I know from our side, from my side, definitely from the World Economic Forum side, we'd be very happy to help continue to engage in this space and bring what we can. But I just, I hope you took away the energy and the dynamism that the panel brought to this. So thank you to a fabulous panel, and enjoy the rest of GEO Week.